Welcome to the TEK2day podcast powered by CEO Rater. It's your host, John Maeda. Check us out online at ceorater.com, where you may anonymously rate your company, rate your CEO. Visit us at TEK2day.com for the latest in technology-related news and content. Fed Chairman Powell talked down Bitcoin this evening. Bitcoin's not really a focus of our fintech coverage at TEK2day, although we've written a number of articles about cryptocurrency more broadly. I think the most recent one was an article we wrote a couple of weeks ago around digital currencies issued by central banks. And so we provided the example of China and its initiative around digital currency, which is going to coincide with the 2022 Olympics. And so despite the Fed saying they're going to take their time, they announced in the summer of 2020 that they're experimenting with digital currencies. They're not going to be a decade behind China, the US Federal Reserve. So yes, a digital currency won't be issued overnight, but it's going to happen fairly quickly. We suspect certainly by the end of this decade, if not over the next few years. And the Fed likes to control its money supply. So for sure, cryptocurrencies are going to be reined in. I mean, that seems obvious to us. Interest rates came down a little bit today, so perhaps the Fed was out there looking to bring in the 10-year. As we've written about over the past several weeks, we think that the Fed ultimately will formally announce a plan to ramp up its quantitative easing program to get the long rates down. And what we wanted to focus on tonight was the $3 trillion infrastructure program as announced by the Biden administration, or at least that's their plan. We just spoke about this on our most recent podcast episode earlier today, where we said expect a $1 to $2 trillion plan. I believe the $3 trillion plan will get negotiated down to $2 trillion, but that it ultimately will happen, because the taxpayer is the gift that just keeps on giving. And so while I'm not in favor of printing money that we don't have, this is all debt funded. This is all driving up the deficit. So the Trump stimulus, the two tranches under Trump, the $1.9 trillion tranche under Biden, that's all debt driven. The government does not have that cash on hand, so to speak. That is all capital that's printed by the Fed, as will be this next tranche. I think there is some good use, however. I think there are some strategic areas that the United States needs to have a focused effort around from a national defense standpoint, from a long-term economic growth standpoint. And it would make sense, I believe, to structure these broad efforts by way of a public-private partnership. And so one area would be cryptocurrency. We wrote about the SolarWinds breach back in December. We have at least 2, maybe 3 articles on that. And then, of course, there was the Microsoft Exchange breach several weeks ago, where we talked about it on the podcast at a high level, but didn't cover it in great detail. That breach was actually larger than the SolarWinds breach. SolarWinds looks to have been perpetrated by Russian government, and in the case of the Microsoft Exchange breach, it looks to have been perpetrated by Chinese government. I think these sovereign-backed cyber hacks are just going to be par for the course. They will increase in frequency. Some may be smaller, some may be larger, but these probes are going on constantly, and they're part of an intelligence gathering effort. And so what we've said in response to not only SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange breach, but if you just think about the various systems that we have deployed in the US, that are deployed across Western Europe as it relates to various payment systems, government enterprise software from companies like Tyler Technology, you name it, home titling, that process, automobile titles, all these processes that are, the underpinnings are a combination of paper, manual workflows, and legacy software. They're all ripe for fraud. And of course, we've seen fraud ramp up as the government's stimulus programs over the past year have been rolled out. When the government writes sizable checks, those are opportunities that are ripe for fraud. And so in any event, what we've posited is that, a good way to mitigate the risk associated with cyber fraud isn't so much the remedy isn't so much to layer on cybersecurity software per se. I mean, that sort of helps identify threats for sure. But a more strategic approach would be to replace the legacy underpinnings that power all of our transaction-based systems with modern distributed systems such as blockchain, right? Distributed ledger technology, where you have a public ledger, multiple authentication points, everything's decentralized. So it makes it more difficult to hack and to steal troves of PII data, personally identifiable information. And so that's an area that it seems like would make sense for whether it's federal and state governments work in conjunction with the private sector to modernize the underpinnings of some of these various systems. You think about the process by which driver's licenses are issued and passports and things of that nature, enrollments in public schools, so on and so forth. So this is the type of process that we believe would make sense insofar as a Biden administration infrastructure program is concerned. Deploy the capital in these type of initiatives that will pay dividends over the long term. Another area, for example, would be the electric grid, if that wasn't abundantly clear over the past few weeks as grids went down across the country, in Texas most notably. But that's legacy hardware infrastructure that for sure we could build and deploy a modernized infrastructure with far superior redundancy and deliver it at a cost that would be a fraction to operate going forward as compared to the legacy infrastructure that we have in place. Now, of course, anytime the government's involved with these programs and large sums of money are talked about, such as a $3 trillion effort, as you can imagine, the private sector will take full advantage and have a field day and win, massive contracts. And the taxpayer is going to lose, obviously, not only in terms of more printing leading to more inflation, but the government, i.e. the taxpayer, overpaying to build these various infrastructure products and services. We're going to overpay to get this done, as is the case with most every government project. So in terms of the lesser of two evils, we would prefer that if in fact the government's going to move forward with this type of infrastructure program, and they will, it would make a lot of sense to get the private sector involved at the ground level and make them a partner, preferably the operating partner, as we move forward with various initiatives as it relates to the $3 trillion infrastructure program. That's all for now. See you next time.